We're back. We're back with cases. It's been over a year, and we've been totally overhauling our ATX case testing methodology. We're going to start with the Fractal XL version of the North to review today, and this is the first of many to come. Our case methodology piece is coming up. That'll be published in the next few weeks. We have some major discoveries we made. We're documenting and detailing all of them. The goal of that piece, we were working on it. We were going to publish it a little early, and then as I dug more and more into the data and the findings, we're like, you know what, let's just make this a comprehensive research paper, basically, put it in video format too, get it out there, and then everything's available, and that kind of serves as a cornerstone long-term reference piece for how we test ATX cases. But we're gonna start by debuting the North XL. This is a lightweight version of the new methodology, so we've got maybe a quarter of the tests in here that we have been working on in total, but it's a good primer and a good start. And that means we need to get back into practice for ATX reviews. They have long been a mainstay on the channel though, and if you've been around long enough to have seen them, then you know the depth we go into for the reviews of ATX cases. And now, with the updated modern testing platform, we have a lot of cool things we can do with flow-through testing specifically. But that's all. I'm getting into the methodology stuff early. Okay, so for this one, we're still working through a backlog of cases, adding to the new chart. We have a limited set of data today to start us out and kind of reestablish a foundation for this. The North XL is a follow-up to the smaller North over here, which was a phenomenal case when it launched. It did extremely well. It was actually one of the last cases that we reviewed on our old methodology before taking the break to overhaul everything. And this is $180. There are two versions. There's a tempered glass version, which I have here. We also have the mesh panel. We've done that testing as well, and they're both $180. Now, in addition to the two side panel variants, there are two color variations, and with that, some wood variations. So we get into multiplication tables kind of early today. But there's a white one with a lighter color wood and then a black with this darker color wood. And those are kind of that's the full lineup of these. The original North is $140 today. So this comes in $40 more. It is larger. XL here, it feels a little bit like a misnomer. We'll talk about that in the review. It is not quite as large as the naming XL might suggest. It's closer to sort of normal ATX tower sizing. But one of the true XL aspects of this is the fans. It can fit 180 millimeter fans underneath this mesh top panel, two of them, in fact. We brought you this video with the GN store on store.gamersnexus.net. This is our first ATX case review back in over a year, following a hiatus after a decade of case reviews prior. The majority of our content and testing time is directly funded by support from the GN store and from Patreon. So please consider grabbing something on the store, which helps us stay independent and keep up the testing efforts. We would highly recommend our PC building mod mats, which have long been a staple for the store. The GN15 mat features detailed wiring diagrams, grids for screw tracking, and colorful blocks for organization, rulers for quick measurements, and anti-static snaps for an included common ground point. You might also like our heavy-duty project and soldering mats, which are perfect for not only extreme heat soldering, but also mechanical work, model building, or anything dirty where you want an easily cleaned surface. We've completely reworked the hardware and testing approach for cases, including the introduction of our hemi-anechoic chamber to case testing. Head over to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly. So the original North is, again, one of the last cases we reviewed in our old methods, and it is a relatively small ATX case. Obviously got most of the acclaim online for the looks, but it performed well too. This was a February 2023 launch that's small, open-fronted, and it's a mid-tower in the style of the old Meshify C or the newer Meshify 2 Compact. Following Fractal's traditional naming, this is maybe more appropriate as a North Compact, and this is more of a North Normal. It's a little wider, but it is somewhat close to traditional normal large ATX sizing, not truly extra large, as in excessively large. So this is more similar actually in dimension to the Fantex G500A, and otherwise the Meshify 2 XL, just as an example, is significantly larger by volume compared to the North XL. The biggest downside here immediately is that Fractal has boxed itself into a corner. If they ever want to come out with an even larger Fractal North, they can't use XL. They're gonna have to use a name like the Giga North. At $180 for all SKUs, the North XL is priced between Fractal's own Torrent and Torrent Compact, and it's on par with the Height-Wise 60 and the Corsair 5000D Airflow, the non-RGB variant. The Corsair 5000D Solid got killed after our review of it. Out of those, Corsair's design is the closest to the North XL. It's the most traditional, and we did like the 5000D Airflow, but it's aging, and the price is being propped up by 3 years worth of positive user reviews. As for new cases, $180 is just above the Montech King 95 Pro, depending on the color of it. We'll compare the thermal performance with these cases later in this review. Now, we have to give some airtime to the case's appearance right up front because that's what made it famous originally, and it still has the same wood options where they have an oak and a walnut variant of the white and the black. And other small details include things like coloring of the I/O up top where it's gold for the black edition as an example. Now originally we reviewed the white version of the North, but after working on this one and seeing the black gold and the dark wood together, just purely subjectively, buy whichever one you like, doesn't matter what we think for color, but Patrick and I have come to appreciate the black gold and dark wood actually a little more than the lighter color tones of the original that we reviewed. One aesthetic warning from our original review still applies, which is that case lighting is mostly a waste of money inside the XL with the mesh panel. At best, it's invisible, and at worst, it silhouettes the reinforcements in the side and the front panels. There are two main things that the XL's additional space gets you, though. One is more clearance for components, and the other one's more flexibility for cooling. Regarding components, the major change is that the XL can fit GPUs up to 413 millimeters without removing any fans. Or in other words, enough space to fit a 16-inch pizza. We decided not to film that, it'd be kind of gross. But anyway, that's up from 355 millimeters in the original, so a big space increase. The 4070 Ti we used for case testing fits in the original North, but there's not enough space for Gigabyte's GPU support bracket. The XL, however, has enough space for both the support bracket and the GPU. The XL also reduces the problems with clearance that the original North's side fan bracket, exclusive to the mesh version, had with both the CPU and the GPU coolers. To start with, there are only 2 possible positions for the bracket in the XL versus 3 in the original, which is more of a simplification than it is a downgrade. Putting the bracket in the upper position will mostly benefit downdraft coolers, but it can fit over tower coolers up to 155 millimeters tall, which is enough that it fits even the Peerless Assassin that we use for standardized case testing now. Moving the bracket to the lower position focuses the cooling on the GPU. It's compatible with most GPUs, but it may put some strain on cables with extremely wide cards with power connectors on their edges, like the 4090 FE or the old MSI Twin Frozer model from our old case testing bench. There's a bit of a caveat to this whole thing though, and we'll talk about that in the thermal testing section. One measurement you should check before buying though is the total distance from the surface of the motherboard to the side of the fan bracket, which the total available is 165 millimeters. Another cool benefit of the way they've designed this is that Fractal has used standard hole spacing on the entire rear of the case with its ventilation cutouts, including the PCIe slot covers and the top of the power supply shroud, meaning that the case can have fans fitted in effectively any location where there's enough space for them. And since the XL has more space, more locations are viable. This really opens up the cooling options in ways that don't necessarily appear in easily explained ways on a spec sheet. This does mean though that the entire top of the power supply shroud is see-through, so that doesn't help the glass-sided SKU to look its best. If your power supply cables don't match the color of the case or don't match your build in general, they'll be fully visible. The white variant, for example, would go best with custom cables unless going for a black and white theme. The holes also mean that the shroud top is no longer a possible mounting location for the 2 included 3.5-inch drive brackets, so although the North XL's total drive capacity is the same as the original's, there's one less choice about where to put those drives. The official absolute maximum capacity is 4 2.5-inch drives and 2 3.5-inch drives, and that's with double stacking them. Still, the XL size makes it more practical to actually use the mounts without competing for cable space elsewhere, so that's a big positive for those using non-M.2 drives in addition to a primary. The original North was small enough that fitting anything larger than a 240mm liquid cooler was ambitious, with the hard limit at 360mm. The XL can fit a 420mm rad in the front, although we'd mainly recommend doing so with open loop cooling. Closed-loop coolers function best with a tubes down orientation, and a 420mm CLC-oriented tubes down would be a tight fit in the North XL. It's not deadly for the pump in the same way that positioning the pump at the top of the loop is, but it's more likely to introduce bubbling noises as air at the top of the tank finds its way getting sucked into the tubes, which will happen more and more over years as permeation increases. For radiators over 240mm in size, fans must be mounted to the outside of the chassis and radiators on the inside in order to clear the power supply shroud cutout. As for the top mount, the space above the motherboard's top edge has been more than doubled from 3 centimeters to 7 centimeters. That's a huge size improvement for larger builds and leaves tons of room for cables even when using a top fan mount, which now fits the aforementioned massive 180mm fans if you wanted to go that direction. Also, the extra case width shifts the top mount further from the motherboard, so mounting a radiator with fans in the top slot is now less likely to conflict with VRM heatsinks or RAM. Still, we'd always like to see a removable fan mounting tray just for ease of access. The cutouts below the motherboard haven't really changed, but with the width of the case, it makes them more usable, since previously they'd be partially blocked by an ATX power supply. The included fans at the front of the case are 3 140mm aspect 14 PWMs with a max rated speed of 1700 RPM. All 3 fans are mounted to the front, completely filling the front slots with zero room to spare. The built-in fan hub simply splits one 4-pin PWM input across 4 channels, so there's one extra, but each fan also has a daisy chain connector, meaning there are still 4 open plugs for additional fans out of the box. But if you want to add your own, be mindful of the total current going down one wire. And it'd also be preferable to use 4-pin PWM fans so everything can remain PWM controlled. Fractal has a good track record for taking eATX support seriously, and in a way that's less likely to trigger another eATX rant from us, although probably you all would like to see another one. But the North XL continues the trend with standoffs and cable cutouts to fit full 12-inch by 13-inch SSI-EEB boards. So good job, Fractal, for paying attention to what actual specs are. In order to support the additional standoffs, the motherboard tray is entirely flat, rather than having a cable channel at the front. As a result, as we get into the cable management section, the maximum cable clearance is very slightly smaller than the original North's, 29mm versus 30mm by the spec sheet, but the XL maintains that clearance across the entire motherboard tray. 3 centimeters is acceptable. It's not amazing, but fortunately we exist in at least 3 dimensions. That's not counting the 4th dimension that BitPhoenix banishes its airflow to. The total volume available is much greater than in the original. There are 6 Velcro ties included that follow the most logical cable management paths, so they've pre-placed those for you, as well as a 7th on the rear of the case to tidy up peripheral cables. We'd borrow that tie to maybe manage the CPU power cables instead. I'll pass it off to Patrick briefly here to talk about some of his fit and finish concerns and his attention to detail praise that he has for Fractal.
Let's start off with the fit and finish issues. The top panel, it snaps into place and there's no way to screw it down, which means that the snaps need to be really firm. And on the original North, they were. On the North XL, they're not very strong. It would help a lot if there was some kind of way to screw the top panel down. So things that Fractal has done well in this case and not so well. We'll start with well. It's XL. There's more room for everything. That's the focus here. You can see that I have set the case up with 2 180mm fans in the top here, and there's still room to access these cutouts here. You can still route cables through there. The width of the case means that you can use the side fan bracket right here with most air coolers and most GPUs. There are standoffs in the case for SSI-EEB boards. That's the 12-inch by 13-inch server size boards. They've really put some thought into supporting those, and you can see, I have a cutout here, it actually does fit in the footprint of the case. So if you have a Threadripper workstation that has a really big eATX board, this case would be a good candidate for that. So overall, we're happy with the changes that Fractal has made versus the original North, and I'll pass it back to Steve to get into the thermal testing.
Back to me now. We're gonna get into some testing here. So a couple things, since this is the first one back. The full methodology piece, as I said, it's coming up, contains a ton of detail. I'm trying to figure out the length right now. We could easily run like an hour long on that, but it's a permanent reference, so it's all useful information. We have changed all of the hardware. None of the data is comparable to our prior case reviews. This is the first time in something like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years that we've completely changed the hardware. So we have the downside of we don't have every case basically in history that we had on the old one. I think we had 400 lines of data on that. Still trying to compile that for a follow-up, a final send-off. But we don't have that. We have a new set of data that we've run just in the last week or so. And it has refined testing methodologies, way more accurate. We can show a lot of cool behaviors with new types of approaches to cooling. So we're using a flow-through cooler. It's the Gigabyte Aero card, which we chose specifically because it has a humongous flow-through area. And part of what we'll show in the methodology piece is, as you'd expect, that has an impact on CPU thermals. And so that was actually the main reason we switched hardware, because that's clearly become the approach to video card design these days. And we want to represent that in our testing. We're still using air coolers. We're using a Thermalright Peerless Assassin. If you've watched our cooler reviews, you know exactly why. And for the Peerless Assassin, one of the main reasons we chose it is specifically because it holds that pressure really well, and it doesn't really seem to lose any pressure over time. We've done testing on that, and that's important because, again, this will be for the methods piece, but as a teaser, we're using a cryo sheet rather than paste. Spent a lot of time validating the two, and with the standard paste we were going to use, it's about the same performance for the heat load we're testing with, except we will never have to worry about paste aging or the pump out effect, which happens from thermal cycling over time where paste works itself out. That was one of the big challenges we wanted to resolve this time, is how do we avoid having to repaste, where we then have to worry about data consistency, where we start stripping old results from the charts if we need to recalibrate everything, and this completely avoids it. So anyway, a lot of really cool improvements. Even on the thermocouple, we've improved in placement of that for the ambient readings. But enough of that. I'm really excited about the methods. I really want to talk about it right now, but I'm trying to save it to keep the video length reasonable, so check back for that. Anyway, the North XL, it is compatible with an $80 Fractal Design Flex 2 riser cable, GPU riser and bracket, vertical bracket for that, and other universal brackets as well probably. But vertically mounted GPUs sound like a good match for a mesh panel. For glass, if they're close to it, we already know it's abysmal, but it depends how far back they seat it on the motherboard. And for the mesh panel, we're gonna put that in with the vertical testing. We have some additional one-off testing for the North XL as well, but let's just get right into it. The first set of thermal data is for noise normalized testing at a chosen 31 dBA threshold in our hemianechoic chamber, tested at 1 meter distance and with a noise floor of about 13.6 dBA. Noise normalizing in the chamber means that all cases are set to the same noise level, so they're unable to leverage extremely loud, super high RPM solutions to beat their way to the top of the chart. This makes the playing field level and fair in a more realistic way, so they have to compete on the merits of the total case and cooling design in combination, not just loud brute force, although we do have a brute force chart in here. This chart shows CPU thermals first. The Fractal Torrent remains the chart leader here, ranking basically tied and within error of our open bench for calibration. The Torrent is able to force air directly toward the CPU cooler, which has the bonus impacts of 1, clearing hot air from the GPU away, and 2, getting some of the neighboring VRM components a little bit cooler as well, so they don't heat soak around the CPU as much. Ultimately, these are basically within error though. We put the Torrent on here because it remains a case we consider the GOAT, at least for its generation, and it proves that even with an entirely different approach to testing and a new list of parts, this case remains the king of cooling. The case setting the floor is the Pop Air, at least as we've tested them currently. There's plenty of way worse ones. This one's down at 54 degrees Celsius over ambient. That's still good in an objective sense, but it gives us 8 degrees of range to work with for the differences so far, which is great. This isn't even our final form. That comes when we retest the BitPhoenix Enso or the MSI Sakura. We actually had to bake extra thermal headroom into our results to accommodate hot boxes. Otherwise, our parts would throttle too soon to see the difference. This is a great start for showing range, but leaving room for worse parts. Against the competition, the North XL mesh is close enough to the Torrent to be considered about the same with this test platform. Switching to glass did nothing for thermals here, leaving them functionally equal. Downsizing to the original Fractal North mesh increased temperature by about 1.4 degrees P-core from the XL mesh. The glass side had a similar behavior, with a slight increase that's within error. The K95 and the 5000D do fine in an objective sense, just like the Pop Air does fine here, but they have a larger gap formed. Noise normalization is a hard test for cases that pack fans in every corner, like the K95 Pro, because they're dropping RPM to a point where static pressure will be affected. That's why we have multiple kinds of tests. We'll test the mesh variant of the K95 soon as well. The 5000D is the closest size and style competitor we've tested for the North XL so far, and it's currently losing. At 53 degrees for Corsair, the North XL is about 6 degrees better, which is a lot for this kind of chart. It's a huge swing, and this is at the same noise levels. Corsair's single central front fan and rear exhaust fan just can't keep up with the wider area flow at the front of the North XL. Now for GPU temperatures from the same test, in this one, the open air bench sets the bar, and that's expected, unlike the CPU, where it can benefit from forced airflow and some eviction of heat dump from the GPU benefits from open air when compared to these cases so far. That's because it's normally within a few slots of a power supply shroud or a panel of some kind, both of which restrict access to air. It can't pull air from all sides, and its pressure is reduced when in a case. Open air, it can pull from any direction. It can exhaust it relatively unimpeded, and we're not concerned about needing the pressure to overcome various obstructions because there aren't any. The Torrent leads with the 41.6 degree GPU temperature and a 27 degree memory temperature. Memory here is one of our new metrics we've added. It improves upon the North XL by 1 degree. The mesh and the glass variations are within error of each other and can't be stated as to be meaningfully different with this configuration. That would change with an alternate fan layout, such as mounted to the side panel. The normal North is actually a couple degrees warmer than the XL, helping establish range early. That's great, from a methodological perspective at least, and the K95 Pro is next, still doing fine, but not as well. After that is the 5000D Airflow and the Pop Air, about tied with each other. There's another new chart. We weren't producing these two data points at all in our prior reviews for cases. This one looks at VRM thermals of a MOSFET and the SPD hub thermals. Serial Presence Detect Hub is a chip on DDR5 RAM. The results have open air doing the best without enclosures to trap the heat around the machine, followed by 1 degree from the Fractal Torrent. The North XL is about tied with the Torrent when using the mesh panel for VRM temperature, within 1 degree of the glass variant. The North non-XL is next, about 2 degrees warmer than the North XL. It's a meaningful result. After that is the K95 with the glass panel, and then the glass North non-XL. Finally, the chart closes with the 5000D Airflow and the Pop Air. This data is great because it gives us a 7.7 degree range so far for the VRM numbers, which is a huge swing that establishes a big range in thermals outside of GPU and CPU components, and it can start establishing advantages that we might not have seen in other components outside of the core ones before. So here's one example. The K95 had better SPD thermals than every other case at 17.9 degrees, and yet its VRM thermals were overall average. The SPD hub advantage comes from the position of its fans, which flank the memory on basically all sides. This is exciting data because we'd never have known about this particular design benefit with our older approach to testing. Next up, this chart shows a CPU-only workload at 100% with no GPU load this time. This is one of the charts we're still establishing, so it currently only features the Fractal cases. We're adding more to it. In this one, the North XL remains the chart leader, followed by the North XL with a glass panel. They're the same result. The original North is next, and then the Pop Air. The total range here is about 4 degrees, which, considering it's a CPU-only workload and these cases are all relatively good airflow, is a good start for range. The final set of thermal data for now is up here. This has GPU thermals at full fan speed for the case fans with the same controlled speeds for the CPU and GPU coolers, and then we'll have more tests in the next one as well as we continue to refine this. The Torrent leads here again, followed by the XL. We eliminated some other tests for time in order to accommodate a different one, which is a vertical GPU configuration. In this case, we didn't see a meaningful change from going to vertical, which is great. There's enough space offset from the glass panel that it's still breathing and it's still able to pull from the PCIe slot ventilation. Now, if you went with a full fat 4-slot card or something, you'd be a little bit closer to the panel than we were, so maybe a difference there. The normal North descends the chart more in this one, as other cases ramp their fans more aggressively. The K95 ends up still in the middle. There's a relatively wide gulf between the 5000D with a solid panel at the bottom, which we didn't test noise for, and the Torrent, giving us a huge, almost 9 degree range between cases that are at least partially decent. We're worried to see how much that'll expand with worse cases. So we get to the end of this one for now. We have a lot more work to do on the testing. It's going to take us a while to build up that database you all were used to. because the old one, the old set of data, like I said, that was 7-8 years or something of accumulation, and it's going to take a little bit, but we have a lot of really cool stuff. We've shown you a preview of it today. I'm excited for it. We're already making changes for the next one, and as those kind of finalize and become the concrete, this is 100% what we're doing every time, that's when the methodology piece comes out. But let's get back to the XL specifically. So key competition to consider while you're considering the Fractal North XL. Something like the height Y60 would maybe make sense. That's in the $180 or so range, sometimes a little cheaper, depends. There's the height Y70 at $220. Lian Li has the 011 Evo XL, that's $230, that is a large case. NZXT has the H9 Flow, which is one of its larger cases, that's $150. Lian Li again has the $160 Evo RGB 011 variant. And then Corsair has a brand new 6500X. We just received that one. That's another relatively large ATX size box. The Fractal Torrent is probably one of the most relevant. That's $190. Then there's stuff like the Be Quiet Shadow Base 800DX. That's $154. So there's a lot of options. We've reviewed some of these in the past. You can find those reviews still on the channel. Nothing's really changed. The data has versus this stuff. But in terms of the case, how it builds, with the cable management, that's all the same. So you can check those reviews if you want them. The North XL though, so first starting with this and the original smaller variant, from an ease of installation standpoint, yeah, we'd prefer to build in the North XL. It's bigger, it's easier to build in, that all makes sense. The trade-off is of course size, but it does work the way you'd expect, which is if we had to choose one to build in, Patrick and I would both choose the XL over the North, if for no other reason than ease of installation. So that's working as designed. Generally speaking, the XL is a straight upgrade though from the original North. It has more room for components, that's one thing, but even just having more space to reach in and move cables around is a quality of life improvement. XL is a bit of a misnomer relative to the largest cases on the market though, because it is really still a somewhat normal sized case. At $180 though, Fractal's definitely not trying to make this case a bargain. They are competing more on the features and the looks than they are on pure value at the price. If you're trying to stretch your money as far as possible, there are cheaper options that accomplish a lot of similar objectives with maybe less flair to them. Montech is a company to keep an eye on, and we'll likely have more reviews of its products soon, like the Sky 2 or some of those options. If you have specific models you want us to cover for that, let us know as well. Fractal's price is based on the unique appearance of the North, which we do happen to like, and it also has the performance to back it up. It's one of the best performers on our old charts, and the XL on the new charts is doing pretty damn well also. Of the limited cases we've tested so far, only the Torrent outperforms it, even in noise normalized testing. We had a test with some extra fans. We ended up cutting it for just time and kind of validation because we're still working through everything. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, so there's a lot going on here. But we did some tests with extra fans, side mounted, and what we ended up finding was that for our test configuration, doing side intake did not change the GPU thermals. Didn't include those numbers because what I really want to do is also flip that fan and do side exhaust, because the current theory we have is that because air is obviously getting dumped out of the GPU through the vertical fins and out towards the panel, having that as exhaust might help pull it away, whereas forcing more air in is kind of a conflict, doesn't necessarily seem to improve anything in our initial testing. That may be something for later though. So there's a lot of ways you can lay this out, but as usual, just throwing a bunch of fans at it doesn't make it better performance. It's gonna take some thought as to where that air is going. Overall though, this one's kind of easy because we've already reviewed the North and we liked it, and it's largely looks based, and this is just that except bigger. There's minor improvements in lots of places, like that side mount for the fans we talked about earlier. Generally though, the closest competition we think probably comes from the likes of, actually from the Torrent really, which if I had to get, if I had to give you my choice between these two cases, I would still choose the Torrent. I really like the case. We've worked with it a few times now, built a production system with it, and me personally, my biases are towards high airflow and pure function, which this still does really well. The North, it's achieving similar out of the box thermals, but the Torrent has some fun ways you can reconfigure it with just weird options like with the 180s that are included. And that's something that I'm partial to. but on a chart, they're roughly the same. This one still has a bit of an advantage though, which is probably why I'm favoring it between the two. Realistically though, if you like the way the wood looks, then they're kind of the same for the baseline performance that we've looked at. We're going to be looking at more of the competition for these coming up, including Corsair's brand new case. And check back for all that. Subscribe for more as always. Thank you for watching. We're excited to get this rolling again. This is just the start. And you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly. And we'll see you all next time.